You know, when we try to wrap our minds around the concept of a creator or like the divine architecture of the universe, the images that instinctively come to mind are usually just overwhelmingly grand.
Oh, absolutely.
Like we tend to picture this cosmic judge sitting on a massive, unapproachable throne, or some terrifying force of nature, wielding lightning and shaming galaxies in the dark void of space.
Right. And historically, that kind of imagery is entirely intentional.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is designed to make humanity feel incredibly small. It emphasizes vastness. It emphasizes power. And above all, it really emphasizes an unbridgeable distance between the creator and the created.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then you step into the source material we are examining today, and suddenly that vast, intimidating cosmos is, well, it's shrunk down to the size of a bedroom.
It really is. It's a massive shift.
We're looking at a spiritual landscape that is startlingly intimate. Like, the central image we are unpacking today isn't a judge with a gavel. It's a father sitting on the edge of a bed, singing a lullaby to rock his children to sleep.
Which is just, I mean, it is the absolute definition of a paradigm shift. Moving from a distant cosmic entity to something that profoundly close and personal, it entirely rewrites the rules of engagement between a human being and the divine.
And that is exactly what we are doing today. If you are listening to this right now, maybe you're on your commute, or maybe you're dealing with an inbox full of emails, or just, trying to catch your breath in a really noisy world, we are going to guide you through the architecture of that specific piece.
Right.
We are jumping into an extensive theological text from Avishua Ministries. It's titled Returning Home, The Father Sings a Lullaby. And our mission for this deep dive today is to unpack the central foundational themes of this text.
It's a rich text, too. There's so much to cover.
There really is. We are going to explore its radical redefinition of what home actually means, the incredibly nuanced and, mechanical differences between grace and mercy, the exact psychological anatomy of spiritual restoration, and the ultimate physical promise of the New Jerusalem.
And we should probably establish right up front that while this text is deeply and unapologetically rooted in Christian theology and biblical scripture, our approach here is to really examine the structural integrity of the author's arguments.
Right. We're looking at the architecture of the ideas.
Exactly. We are looking at the fascinating metaphors, the historical context of the claims, and the philosophical weight behind them. We want to understand the profound comfort this text offers, but also the radical, almost dangerous demands these concepts place on the individual. So we're exploring the landscape of these ideas impartially.
Just looking at the mechanics of how this theology operates.
Yes. How it works from the inside out.
Okay, let's unpack this opening image because it really sets the stage for everything else. The idea of God singing a lullaby is honestly a little jarring. When I think of theology, I think of dense academic arguments, Not a nursery.
Yeah, you expect a textbook.
Right. But the text uses this to set up a stark contrast between the chaos, the anxiety, the relentless noise of our modern world, and the ultimate safety of the home the author is describing.
And it's a brilliant framing device precisely because it disarms the reader. By centering the theology on a lullaby, the text kind of bypasses the intellectual, philosophical defenses we usually put up when we discuss religion.
Oh, that makes total sense.
Right. It goes straight for a primal, psychological human need. I mean, every human being understands the need for rest.
Absolutely.
Every human being understands the desire for safety. So the text frames the entire spiritual journey not as a quest for intellectual enlightenment, but as a search for that specific visceral feeling of being tucked in, protected, and sung to.
But the concept of home is really complicated, right? The author starts with a premise that I think resonates with a lot of people. Home is not a universally positive word.
No, definitely not.
For some, you say home, and they instantly think of safety, the smell of dinner cooking, laughter, a warm fire. But the text doesn't shy away from the darker side of human existence. Mm-hmm. It openly acknowledges that for many, the word home evokes memories of trauma, of abuse, of violence, of monsters hiding in the same house. So the framing question the text forces us to confront is, how do we reconcile that very real, very broken human trauma with the concept of a flawless, safe, heavenly home?
Well, the way the author addresses this is really fascinating. The text doesn't try to invalidate the human experience of a broken home. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't try to say, well, earthly homes are just a little flawed.
Right, it doesn't minimize it.
Exactly. Instead, it creates a strict uncompromising dichotomy. It defines God's intended home as a space that is entirely structurally void of those earthly corruptions.
Yeah.
It is a space fundamentally incompatible with strife, illness, bitterness, and those monsters you mentioned.
Okay.
But the crucial theological pivot the author makes here relies heavily on the Gospel of John, specifically John chapter 14.
Right, where Jesus talks about preparing a place.
Exactly. Now, the common cultural interpretation is that God is up in the clouds building a mansion for you to live in after you die.
Like a cosmic real estate agent.
Right, yeah. But the text asserts that God's primary desire isn't just to prepare a post-mortem estate, it is to make a home within the believer. Here and now, Jesus says, we will come to them and make our home with them.
So the eternal refuge starts internally.
Yes, it is an immediate, present tense sanctuary.
And to illustrate how a person actually arrives at that internal refuge, the author uses this completely unexpected pop culture analogy. I was reading through these dense scriptural references, and suddenly there's a reference to the yellow brick road from The Wizard of Oz.
Huh, yeah. It is definitely a sudden shift in tone, but rhetorically it does exactly what it needs to do.
It works so well. The author compares the biblical concept of the narrow path, which Jesus talks about in Matthew chapter 7, to the road to Oz. It's a journey toward true success, happiness, and eternal bliss. But the nature of the yellow brick road is that it is defined, it's specific, and it's narrow. If you stay on the bricks, you are moving toward the Emerald City, or in this case, the Father's home. But the moment you step off the bricks,
you are in the dark forest.
Yeah.
You are dealing with the flying monkeys, the poppies that put you to sleep, the wicked witches.
Exactly. The text contrasts this defined, narrow yellow brick road with the broad path of the world. The author argues that the broad path looks easier because it has no boundaries, but it ultimately leads to darkness, confusion, and fear.
And the defining characteristic of this journey is that you have to actively choose which path to walk every single day.
Right, it's a daily choice.
And that element of continuous choice leads us to what I found to be the most unique and frankly the most biological metaphor in the entire text.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, the author is trying to explain the theological concept of abiding in God's glory. In Christian phrasing, you hear the word abide a lot, but the text operationalizes what that actually means by comparing this state of abiding to a fetus developing inside an amniotic sac.
I have to say, when I hit that metaphor, I had to stop and reread it. It is incredibly vivid. We go from the yellow brick road straight to human gestation.
It is jarring, I'll admit that. But if we break down the physiological imagery the author is invoking, it is incredibly precise. Think about the biology of a baby in the womb.
Okay.
The fetus is situated within a two-layered membrane. The chorion is the outer layer, and the amnion is the inner layer.
Right.
And within that, you have the amniotic fluid. Now, what does that fluid do? It acts as a shock absorber. It regulates temperature. It completely surrounds the developing child, providing this perfectly calibrated environment where the baby is nurtured, protected, and entirely isolated from outside physical harm.
So if the mother bumps into a table, the fluid absorbs the shock so the baby doesn't feel the sharp impact.
Precisely. And the author argues that when a believer truly abides in God, they are similarly enclosed in his divinity. God's presence acts as a spiritual amniotic sac.
Wow.
The fluid is his glory. When you are situated inside the spiritual membrane, the shocks and impacts of the outside world, the anxiety, the spiritual attacks, the trauma, they might hit the outer wall, but the impact is absorbed by God's glory before it can destroy your spirit.
That is wild. So you're continuously provided for.
Exactly, making it structurally impossible for outside spiritual forces to fatally harm you.
I mean, I see the immense comfort in that imagery. The idea of being perfectly insulated from the shocks of life is incredibly appealing. But I think we have to pause and push back on this a little bit just to test the bounds of the metaphor.
Sure.
If we're just floating in a spiritual amniotic sac, what happens to human agency? What happens to our free will? Because a physical fetus doesn't have a choice in the matter.
Right, it's just in there.
Yeah, it's just trapped in there, floating passively until it's born. So does this theological framework imply that believers are just passive participants in their own spiritual lives, waiting for eternity?
That is the exact tension the text anticipates and addresses. The author clarifies that the biological metaphor has one major limitation, and that is human agency.
Okay.
Unlike a physical baby, which has absolutely no say in its gestation, the believer must actively, consciously choose to remain in the spiritual womb. It is not a passive default state.
So you can choose to step out of the shock-absorbing fluid.
You can, and according to the text, people do it all the time. Remaining in the sack requires active daily surrender. You have to continuously choose not to be distracted by the broad path, not to step off the yellow brick road.
Right.
A baby in the womb naturally grows and develops, but the believer must intentionally yield to the growth process. And fundamentally, you have to realize that you need the safety of the womb to begin with.
Which means recognizing that outside the womb, you are exposed to the elements. You have to realize that you are lost without it.
Yes.
And recognizing that you are lost brings us to a major section of the text, which explores arguably the most famous story about getting lost ever told, the parable of the prodigal son.
Found in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 15. It is really the quintessential human narrative of wandering, squandering, and eventually returning.
Now, I thought I knew this story inside and out, but the text points out a structural observation about the context of Luke 15 that completely reframed it for me. The chapter doesn't just feature one parable about a lost son, it's actually a triptych.
Yeah, it's a set of 3.
Right. It features a progression of 3 lost things, and there's a mathematical countdown happening.
Yes, the zooming in of focus. What's fascinating here is how the stakes are raised.
Exactly. It starts with a parable about a lost sheep. A shepherd has 100 sheep, loses one, and goes after it. That's 1 in 100, a 1% loss.
Right.
Then, Jesus tells a story about a woman who has 10 silver coins, loses one, and tears her house apart looking for it. That's 1 in 10, a 10% loss. And then finally, we arrive at the lost son. A father has 2 sons and one is lost. Suddenly, the ratio is 1 to 1.
The stakes, the intimacy, and the value of what is lost escalate with each story, and there's a progression in how things are lost, too.
Oh, that's true.
I mean, a sheep wanders away out of ignorance. It's just an animal. A coin is lost through someone else's carelessness. It's an inanimate object, but the son is lost through deliberate, premeditated, willful rebellion. He looks at his father and actively demands his inheritance early.
Which, in the historical context of first-century Middle Eastern culture, was incredibly offensive, wasn't it?
It was unimaginably offensive. In that culture, you received your inheritance when your father died.
Right.
For a son to demand his share of the estate while the father was still breathing was functionally equivalent to saying, I wish you were dead. You are worth more to me as a corpse than as a living father. Give me my money so I can leave. It was a profound public shaming of the father.
Wow. And the father gives it to him. The son takes the money, travels to a distant country, and blows it all on wild living. But the text argues something really interesting here. The author posits that the major theme of the prodigal son parable isn't actually the son's conversion from being a bad person to a good person.
Which runs counter to almost every Sunday school lesson ever taught on the subject.
Right. We usually focus entirely on the son learning his lesson.
Exactly. But the text argues that the true overarching theme is the mechanics of restoration. Specifically, how a believer is restored into fellowship with the Father. And to understand that, the focus has to shift from the son's bad behavior to the Father's unyielding character. In the text, the Father, who represents God, remains completely constant. His status doesn't change. The author emphasizes the detail that while the son is gone, the Father is described as eagerly searching the horizon. He sees the son while he was still a long way off.
So he was looking for him.
Yes, this implies a daily habit. The father is on the porch, scanning the distant road, waiting for a silhouette he recognizes. It represents God's personal, unflagging attentiveness. Despite the profound insult of the son's departure, the father's posture is one of waiting, not of vengeance.
Meanwhile, the son's posture is, well, it's literal filth. The text recounts the turning point of the story when the son hits absolute rock bottom. A severe famine hits the land, he's completely out of money, and he ends up hiring himself out to feed pigs. And to make matters worse, he's so hungry he desires to eat the pig slime.
And again, we have to look at the cultural context. For a Jewish boy in the first century, pigs were ceremonially unclean. To be feeding them, let alone wishing you could eat their slop, is the absolute lowest rung of social, religious, and personal degradation.
Total loss of identity.
It is.
But the author makes a really sharp psychological observation here.
Yeah.
What actually sparks the son's repentance? It isn't a sudden moral epiphany that his actions were objectively bad.
Yeah.
It is the stark, undeniable realization of the world's shallow, selfish fulfillment, contrasted with the sudden memory of his father's goodness.
Right.
He is sitting in the mud and he realizes, wait a minute, even my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death.
Yeah.
It's the contrast between the cruelty of the world and the generosity of the home that breaks his rebellion.
That memory of the father's nature is the catalyst. Without the memory of a good home, there is no motivation to leave the pig pen.
So he formulates a plan. He prepares a very specific speech. He plans to go back, but he knows he squandered his right to be called a son. The inheritance is gone. So his plan is to beg for a job as an indentured servant.
Yeah.
He's willing to give up all his familial rights, put on a servant's uniform, and work the fields just to be back on the property where there is food.
He is operating on a purely transactional mindset. I owe a debt, I will work it off. But when he approaches the estate, the father's reaction shatters that transactional framework completely.
The father sees him from a long way off, feels compassion, and he runs to him. And we should point out, an elderly patriarch in that culture running, that's a big deal.
Oh, highly undignified. A man of his stature would wear long robes. To run, he would have to hike up his robes, bare his legs, and sprint down the dirt road.
Wow.
In a shame and honor culture, the father is actively taking the shame upon himself to reach his son before the rest of the village can come out and mock him.
He reaches the son, embraces him, kisses him, and the son tries to give his prepared speech. Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father literally interrupts him.
He doesn't even let him finish.
Right. He doesn't even acknowledge the request to be a servant. Instead, he turns to his servants and gives 3 very specific commands. And this is where the text gets incredibly granular about the anatomy of complete restoration. The father gives the son 3 physical artifacts.
Yes, and in the author's theological framework, each of these items carries immense legal, psychological, and spiritual weight. They are not just nice gifts, they are mechanisms of reinstatement.
Okay, let's break them down.
The first thing the father commands is, bring the best robe and put it on him.
Not just a clean shirt, the best robe.
Exactly. Historically, the best robe in a wealthy household belonged exclusively to the father himself. The son is standing there covered in the stench of pigs, in rags. By taking his own robe and draping it over the son, the father is physically covering the son's shame.
That's a powerful image.
It is a sign of immediate dignity, honor, and undeniable proof of acceptance back into the family. Theologically, the text explains this represents a believer being clothed in the Redeemer's righteousness. When God looks at the restored believer, he doesn't see the pig pen, he sees his own robe.
And then the father says, put a ring on his finger.
This is perhaps the most significant legal detail. This wasn't a piece of decorative jewelry. This would have been the family signet ring. In the ancient world, a signet ring was used to stamp hot wax on official documents.
Oh, wow.
It was the functional equivalent of the father's signature or a modern-day corporate credit card.
Wait, really? So the son who just liquidated and wasted half the family estate is immediately handed the keys to the treasury again?
Exactly. It makes no financial or logical sense. But it makes perfect theological sense in the context of restoration. The ring is a sign of absolute authority and sonship.
Okay.
It represents what the Apostle Paul calls the spirit of adoption. It proves he isn't a servant. A servant can be fired. A servant doesn't hold the family seal. The ring reinstates his identity as an heir.
And finally, the third item, put sandals on his feet. Now, when I first read this, I thought, well, his feet are probably cut up from walking home. But the text explains why shoes matter so much.
Yeah. In that cultural context, slaves and hired servants went barefoot inside the house. Only free men, guests, and sons wore sandals. By commanding that sandals be put on his feet, the father is making a public, undeniable declaration to the entire household.
He's not a servant.
Right. This boy is not going to work the fields to pay off his debt. He is my free son. Furthermore, the text points out that sandals prepare his feet to walk in holiness, equipped with the gospel of peace, rather than walking in the dirt of slavery.
So if we synthesize the author's argument from these 3 artifacts, God's agenda for a returning believer is not probation.
No.
He doesn't want us back so he can punish us or put us in a cosmic timeout or say, I told you so.
Yeah.
He certainly doesn't want us operating as indentured servants trying to pay off an infinite spiritual debt through good works. He demands absolute, instantaneous, full restoration of status, from the pig pen directly back to Prince.
That is the core message of the parable, according to this text. It is a complete and utter restoration of fellowship. The transactional mindset of the son is entirely overridden by the relational mindset of the father.
But logically, this raises a massive problem. And the text knows it. How exactly does this legal and spiritual restoration happen when the son so clearly, undeniably squandered his inheritance?
Right, the justice aspect.
He broke the rules. He wasted the estate. Justice screams that he should have to pay it back or at least face some kind of penalty. This pension leads directly to a critical section of the text where the author draws a hard distinction between two concepts that people, even theologians and pastors, confuse all the time: grace and mercy.
They are often used interchangeably in modern conversation as if they mean the exact same thing.
Yeah.
But in the architecture of this theology, they are completely distinct mechanisms operating in sequence.
Okay, so let's define the terms. The source text draws a very bright line between them. Help us unpack the linguistic and theological differences the author presents, starting with mercy. How does the text define mercy?
Well, the text defines mercy fundamentally as deliverance from judgment. It is God actively choosing to withhold the punishment that humanity fundamentally deserves due to sin. To ground this, the author digs into the specific Hebrew words used in the Old Testament. The first is racham.
Racham, what does that root mean?
It translates to deep compassion, but the root of the word is actually tied to the Hebrew word for womb.
Wow, back to the womb imagery.
Exactly. It implies an innate maternal protective connection. The second word is cheesed, which is a massive theological concept, often translated as loving kindness, goodness, or covenantal loyalty. So when the text talks about mercy, it is talking about a judge looking at a completely guilty verdict, having the full legal right to execute the sentence, and deciding out of deep compassion not to destroy the guilty party. Mercy is the stopping of negative action. It is not getting what you deserve.
So if mercy is stopping the negative, what is grace?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, grace is what happens after mercy has cleared the board. Grace is extending active kindness and blessing to the unworthy. It is unmerited favor.
Okay, to use the prodigal son again. Mercy is the father not locking the gate and leaving the son to starve in the famine. Grace is the father putting the best robe on his shoulders, handing him the signet ring, and throwing a massive feast in his honor. Mercy is surviving. Grace is thriving when you literally deserved nothing.
Let me try an analogy to make this really concrete, because I think it's the hinge upon which this whole text swings. Imagine you commit high treason against a king.
All right.
The evidence is irrefutable, you are caught red-handed, and the legal penalty is execution by hanging. You are standing on the gallows. Mercy is the king showing up, tearing up the death warrant, and saying, "You are pardoned, you won't die today."
Right. That is staggering in itself. You are free to go, but you are still a known traitor. You are probably going to be exiled, broke, and shamed for the rest of your life. Grace is the king tearing up the death warrant and then stepping down from his horse, taking off his own royal cloak, putting it over your shoulders, legally adopting you as his heir, and moving you into the royal palace. You go from the gallows straight to the dining table. Mercy kept you out of the grave. Grace gave you the kingdom.
That captures the sequential nature of the concepts perfectly. And the author grounds this duality in a deeply ancient, highly revered Old Testament physical object. The mercy seat.
The Ark of the Covenant, right? Think Indiana Jones, but the actual biblical theology behind it.
Exactly. The text describes the physical architecture of the Ark of the Covenant, which was kept hidden behind a massively thick veil in the Holy of Holies, the innermost sanctuary of the temple in Jerusalem. The Ark was a box made of acacia wood overlaid with gold. Inside the box were the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments, the law. And the law represents condemnation because humanity constantly broke it.
The evidence of our guilt was literally kept in a box.
Yes. But covering that box was a solid gold lid featuring two cherubim with their wings stretched out, facing each other and looking down. This lid was called the mercy seat. Under the Old Covenant, the high priest could enter the space only once a year on the Day of Atonement.
Right.
He would sprinkle the blood of a sacrificed animal onto the mercy seat. The theological symbolism is that when God looked down, he didn't see the broken law. He saw the blood covering the law, and he extended mercy to the nation of Israel for one more year. It was a terrifying, highly restricted access. If the priest did it wrong, he died.
It's a mechanism of survival. But the author argues that Jesus completely disrupted this ancient system. The text says Jesus physically became this mercy seat for humanity.
Yes. The text states that through the physical blood of Jesus, the veil that separated humanity from the Holy of Holies, the veil that kept everyone out, was physically torn in two from top to bottom. Jesus became both the ultimate high priest and the ultimate final sacrifice. By doing this, He demolished the restricted access. He allowed every single believer, not just one specialized priest once a year, to enter the presence of God boldly. At the cross, the believer receives both the withholding of punishment mercy, because the blood covers the broken law, and the ultimate blessing of adoption grace.
Now, when you really sit and reflect on the sheer weight of this grace, as the author describes it, if you're a modern reader, it can almost sound too easy. For the believer, it's totally free. You just accept it. You walk in, you get the ring, you get the robe, you get the pardon. It feels like a loophole.
Yeah.
But the text makes it painfully, viscerally clear that while this grace is free to the consumer, it was unimaginably expensive for the purchaser.
It absolutely was.
Which leads us into the author's intense, almost clinical examination of what they call radical love and the actual physical toll of the cross.
The text does not gloss over the brutality required to purchase this grace. It grounds the abstract theological concept of love in stark historical and medical physics.
And here's where it gets really interesting, but also where the reading gets really intense. The author provides a breakdown of Roman crucifixion that reads less like theology and more like a medical autopsy report.
It's very thorough.
We're talking about the flagrum, the specific type of short whip used by the Roman lictors. It wasn't just leather, it had pieces of jagged sheep bone and lead weights woven into the ends of the strips.
Right.
It was specifically engineered to tear through skin, subcutaneous tissue, and muscle, exposing bone and inducing severe hypovolemic shock before the execution even officially began.
We should probably define hypovolemic shock here because it's critical to the medical timeline. It means the body has lost so much blood volume that the heart can no longer pump enough blood to the organs. Blood pressure plummets, tissues lack oxygen, and the victim experiences intense, maddening thirst. Jesus was already dying of severe fluid loss before he even reached the hill.
And then the text details the patibulum, the heavy wooden crossbar. The victim, already in shock, was forced to carry this beam, which weighed between 75 and 100 pounds, tied across their shredded shoulders.
The author even references a specific 2006 study by the Royal Society of Medicine regarding the actual mechanics and cause of death in crucifixion. It notes the specific 45-degree angle of the knees when the feet were nailed to the vertical post.
This detail was haunting. Explain why the angle of the knees mattered.
Well, when a victim is hanging by their arms, the weight of their body pulls down on the diaphragm, making it impossible to exhale. You can draw air in, but you cannot push it out. To exhale, the victim had to push up on the iron nail driven through their feet, extending their 45-degree knees, scraping their lacerated back against the rough wood of the cross, just to deflate their lungs.
So every single breath was an agonizing, full-body effort.
Exactly. Ultimately, the text explains, the cause of death was a slow, deliberate chain reaction. As exhaustion set in, the victim couldn't push up to breathe. This led to asphyxiation. Carbon dioxide built up in the blood, causing the tissues to become acidic. This resulted in fluid gathering around the heart and lungs, eventually causing the heart to fail because it was too constricted to pump whatever oxygenated blood was left. The victim literally drowned from the inside out.
Now, it's crucial to understand why the author includes these gruesome historical and medical details. It is not for shock value.
No, not at all.
It's not horror for the sake of horror. It is an attempt to quantify, in human terms, the concept of radical love.
Mm-hmm.
The Romans used crucifixion specifically for intimidation, crowd control, and the absolute humiliation of insurgents and runaway slaves. It was designed to strip a human being of every ounce of dignity. The author's theological argument is that Jesus, as the incarnate God of the universe, willingly allowed himself to be subjected to this specific, slow, agonizing humiliation to prove a point.
To prove that there is absolutely no price he wouldn't pay. The text refers to it as paying a king's ransom. The pain was the undeniable proof of the love. If the cost is infinite, the value placed on the object being purchased, humanity, is also infinite.
So if God demonstrates this radical, self-sacrificing, physically agonizing love to purchase grace for the believer, what does the text say is the expectation for you, the listener? What is the return on that investment? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because if someone pays $1 billion for a house, they expect something from that house.
This is where the theology turns outward, and the text introduces the concept of dangerous love. Because God's love was radically self-denying to the point of death, the believer who receives that grace is commanded to exhibit a love that is equally radical in their own life.
Okay.
And the text defines this explicitly, drawing from the Sermon on the Mount. Believers are commanded to love their enemies, not just tolerate them, but love them. They are told to actively pray for their persecutors and to engage in tangible good deeds toward the very people who treat them wrongfully.
The text brings up Mother Teresa caring for the destitute, the diseased, and the dying in the slums of Calcutta as a modern manifestation of this dangerous love. It's a love that moves toward the pain rather than running away from it.
Yes. It is a love that actively defies the most basic human instinct, self-preservation. It is self-denying, not self-seeking.
But practically, psychologically, how is that possible? The text references Matthew 5, blessing those who curse you. If I am really honest, how do you actually love someone who actively torments you? How do you rejoice when people mock you or cancel you or persecute you? Human nature, our entire evolutionary biology, screams at us to defend ourselves, to seek justice, to hit back harder, or at the very least to hate them back in our hearts.
It's the ultimate ethical dilemma of Christian theology, and the author provides a very specific psychological and theological mechanism for it. The secret to this dangerous love, according to the text, is an unwavering faith in what theologians call future grace.
Future grace. Okay, let's unpack that mechanism. How does knowing the future change my reaction to an insult today?
The author argues that you don't love your enemy in order to earn your way into heaven. If you did, that would be works-based theology, which the text entirely rejects because it turns grace into a wage you earn. Rather, the mechanism works backward.
Backward.
Yeah, because you know your eternal reward is already absolutely secure, because the king's ransom has been paid, the death warrant is torn up, and you already possess the ring and the robe. You are completely freed from the frantic need to defend your own rights in the present.
It's an issue of secure status.
Exactly. Think of it this way. If you have $10 billion secured in a bank account and someone on the street steals a $5 bill from your wallet, you aren't going to fight them to the death over it.
Right. You don't need it.
Your wealth is secure. In the same way, your soul satisfaction is already fulfilled in God's future promise. Therefore, the certainty of the joy of heaven streams backward into your present horror, giving you the supernatural freedom to love radically and dangerously right now. Your ego is no longer tied to how people treat you. You have nothing left to lose, so you can afford to give away love to those who absolutely do not deserve it.
That is a staggering psychological framework. It effectively neutralizes the power of an enemy. But living this out on a Tuesday afternoon when someone cuts you off in traffic or undermines you at work, it requires an incredibly deep, continuously renewed relationship with God. It's not just a Sunday activity where you sit in a pew and listen to a choir.
Oh, definitely not.
It requires a daily act of intimacy to maintain that eternal perspective. And the text transitions here to explain exactly how this daily intimacy works, using a very relatable architectural metaphor about a door, a house, and an occupant.
It centers on a highly quoted, very famous verse from the book of Revelation, chapter 3, verse 20.
Right. Jesus says, "Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person and they with me." Now, I grew up seeing paintings of this my whole life. Often it's that famous William Holman Hunt painting, The Light of the World, with Jesus standing outside an overgrown cottage door holding a lantern. And the common assumption I always heard was that he's knocking on the heart of an atheist or an unbeliever, asking to come in and save them. But the text aggressively corrects this misconception.
Radically corrects it. And this raises an important question, right? Because if you simply look at the historical and biblical context of Revelation chapter 3, Jesus is not speaking to the pagan world. He is not speaking to atheists. He is dictating a letter specifically to the church in a city called Laodicea. He is knocking on the door of people who already claim to be his followers.
Which is a wild concept if you think about it. How can the head of the church be locked out of his own church?
Well, the text delves into the spiritual condition of these Laodiceans. They were described as lukewarm. Now, historically, Laodicea was situated near two other cities, Hierapolis, which had famous hot healing mineral springs, and Colossae, which had cold, refreshing mountain water.
Okay.
Laodicea had to pike its water in, and by the time it arrived, it was tepid, lukewarm, and full of minerals that literally made people vomit.
So Jesus is using a local insult.
Yes.
Yeah.
He is saying, you are neither healing like hot water nor refreshing like cold water. You are tepid. They were self-reliant, smug in the economic prosperity, and spiritually indifferent. They thought they had everything they needed, completely unaware of their own spiritual wretchedness and poverty. So Jesus is standing outside the lives of his own people, asking to be let back into the center. And notice what he promises if they open the door. He doesn't say, I will come in and save your spirit from hell. He says, I will come in and eat with you.
He wants to dine with them. In ancient Middle Eastern cultures, sharing a meal wasn't just grabbing fast food. It was the ultimate sign of covenantal friendship, trust, and deep intimacy. God desires a relationship that goes far beyond legal salvation. He wants daily companionship. He wants to sit at the table.
Exactly. To explain how believers manage to lock God out of the dining room, the author unpacks a powerful psychological metaphor called the room of the soul. I want you to imagine that your soul, which the text defines as your mind, your emotions, and your willpower, is a large physical room. The author argues that on the day of salvation, many believers excitedly invite God into the room, but almost immediately they begin to partition the space.
They put up spiritual drywall.
Precisely. They say, God, you can have this nice clean corner over here for Sunday mornings, prayer before meals, and morality, but I am keeping the rest of the square footage for myself.
And what do we keep in the rest of the room? The text says we fill it with the world. And by world, it doesn't mean trees and mountains. It means our old coping mechanisms, our secret addictions, our idolatry, our worldly mindsets, our obsession with status, our pride. We want the safety of the amniotic sac, but we also want the thrill of the dark forest.
And the text breaks down the severe consequences of this inner cognitive dissonance. Because we insist on keeping the rest of the room filled with the world, we are actively, legally giving the devil and demonic influences a right to be present and active in that exact same room.
Wait, so you have God and the devil sharing the exact same real estate in a person's mind?
Yes, because the believer invited both of them in. And the result of this shared occupancy is a state of constant, exhausting internal warfare. As the text vividly puts it, we sing praises to God in one breath, but we still dance with the devil in the other. We are fundamentally divided. We experience anxiety, depression, and spiritual defeat because our room is a war zone.
So how does the text propose we achieve spiritual freedom? Does God just eventually get fed up, knock down the drywall, and forcibly take over the whole room?
No, and this brings us back to the concept of free will we discussed earlier. The author asserts that God is a gentleman. He will not brainwash us. He will not override our free will. He won't violently conquer the rest of the room if you don't give him the key. True spiritual freedom and the deep peace the text calls a lullaby only comes when the believer voluntarily yields every single square inch of the room to him. We have to actively evict the world to make full room for the divine. It requires submitting our thoughts, our emotional reactions, and our daily willpower entirely to his occupancy.
It's an all-or-nothing proposition. And yielding the whole room of our soul here on earth, letting God have total occupancy, essentially prepares us for our ultimate destination. Because if we spend our lives making room for God in our earthly existence, the text has a massive amount to say about the physical room God is preparing for us in eternity. Which leads us to the grand finale of this theological framework, the New Jerusalem.
The ultimate eschatological promise, the culmination of the entire human story.
Let's tackle the popular cultural myth first, because I think it clouds our understanding of texts like this. When you ask the average person on the street what heaven is like, you almost always get the same cartoon image. We die, we become disembodied spirits or angels, we get wings, we sit on fluffy white clouds, and we play harps in endless, hazy choir practice for all eternity. It sounds serene, but honestly, it sounds incredibly tedious. How does the author's vision, which is heavily based on the final chapters of the Bible, Revelation 21 and 22, differ from the cloud myth?
The text strongly, explicitly rejects the idea of floating around in the ether as ghostly spirits. The ultimate promise presented in Revelation is not an escape from physical reality. It is the redemption of physical reality. We are talking about a new heaven and a new earth. The text describes the holy city, the New Jerusalem, actually coming down out of heaven to be situated on this perfectly restored new earth.
So humanity doesn't evacuate the earth to go live in the sky forever. God moves his capital city down to us. Heaven and earth merge.
Exactly. The dwelling place of God is now with humanity. And the text describes the physics of this new realm. It says the former things have passed away. Specifically, it notes there is no more sea.
Which sounds disappointing if you like the beach. Why no sea?
Well, you have to view it through the lens of ancient Near Eastern literature. For the ancient Israelites, who were not a seafaring people, the sea did not represent vacations. It represented the abyss. It represented chaos, the Leviathan, uncontainable danger, and separation. To say there is no more sea is a theological way of saying there is no more chaos, no more threat of sudden destruction, and nothing separating humanity from God or from each other. Furthermore, the text states there will be no sorrow, no crying, and absolutely no physical or emotional pain. It is a tangible physical realm entirely devoid of the corruption of sin.
What I found incredibly beautiful was the symmetry the author highlights between the very beginning of the biblical narrative and the very end. In Genesis and the Garden of Eden, humanity rebels and they're physically exiled, cut off from the tree of life by cherubim wielding a flaming sword. We are kicked out of paradise. But when Revelation, in the New Jerusalem, the tree of life is fully restored. It sits on either side of a pure river of the water of life, and the text notes that its leaves are for the healing of the nations. It's a complete cosmic return to Eden, but elevated from a garden to a sprawling, perfect city.
It is the ultimate restoration arc. It proves that God didn't abandon his original design for Earth. He redeemed it. But perhaps the most surprising detail the text emphasizes is the role of the believer in this new reality. To your point earlier, we are not just going to passively worship or strum harps. The text asserts that believers are destined to rule and reign with Christ as kings and priests over this physical kingdom.
We have actual jobs, cosmic administration.
We will have purpose, creativity, and authority. The text touches on the eschatological timeline, mentioning the 1,000-year millennial reign, a literal period of peace and perfect governance on earth. And to inherit and rule this kingdom, the author explains that our frail human bodies will be fundamentally transformed. Referencing 1 Corinthians 15, the text describes how our current bodies are like seeds planted in the ground. They die, but what grows from them is a spiritual body.
Oh, no, spiritual body sounds like an oxymoron.
It does, but Paul uses it to describe a body that is still physical and tangible. Remember, Jesus ate fish with his disciples after his resurrection, but it is no longer powered by corruptible flesh and blood. It is a physical body animated entirely by the Holy Spirit. It is immortal, immune to disease, fatigue, and death. Furthermore, the text points out that earthly institutions that define our current reality, specifically human marriage, will no longer exist in this new state.
Right, Jesus himself taught that in the resurrection, people will neither marry nor be given in marriage, which can sound sad to someone who is happily married.
It can, but the theological reasoning is profound. Human marriage is designed by God as a temporary earthly shadow or metaphor for the ultimate reality, which is the union between Christ and the church. When the ultimate reality arrives in the New Jerusalem, the shadow is no longer needed. All human relationships will take on a completely new, infinitely deeper, pure intimacy, because the eternal state is entirely God-centered, not human-centered. You won't love your spouse less. Your capacity to love everyone will be elevated to perfection.
Okay, so that is a breathtaking, massive vision of the future. The restored Eden, the new bodies, the end of chaos. But I want to bring this back to the listener right now. If I'm dealing with a stressful commute or inflation or a sick child or a broken relationship, how does this far-off future reality impact my Tuesday? How do we seek this kingdom now in the middle of the mess?
The author provides a very sharp, practical application. When Jesus taught his followers the Lord's Prayer, he told them to pray, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." The text points out that he wasn't just telling them to sit around and wait passively for the end of the world. He was issuing a radical call to internalize God's future values immediately.
We're supposed to pre-enact the future.
That's a brilliant way to put it. The text refers to believers as sojourners and pilgrims whose true citizenship is already in heaven. Because your citizenship is elsewhere, you are commanded to stop conforming to the spirit of the age, the culture of outrage, the greed, the endless anxiety, the tribalism of the modern world. You are called to start living by the culture, values, and morals of your eternal home right now. You seek the kingdom first by allowing its rules to dictate how you spend your money, how you treat your enemies, and how you structure your inner life today.
Wow. We have covered an immense amount of spiritual, historical, and philosophical ground today. To quickly summarize this incredible journey the author took us on, we started in the biological absolute safety of the amniotic sac, learning that abiding in God is a state of total, shock-absorbing protection, provided we choose to stay there. We watched the prodigal son trade the shame of the pig pen for the ring of authority and the robe of righteousness, discovering the critical sequential difference between a mercy that halts our execution and a grace that adopts us into the royal family.
We examined the brutal physical, medical cost of that grace on the cross, which demands a dangerous love from us in return, a love that is only psychologically possible because of the certainty of our future grace.
We talked about the psychological warfare of partitioning the room of our soul, the danger of keeping a corner for our old habits. And finally, we looked ahead to the restored physics, the end of the sea of chaos, and the cosmic administration of the New Jerusalem.
It is a comprehensive, deeply challenging architectural blueprint of a specific theological worldview. It demands everything from the believer, but promises everything in return.
I want to speak directly to you as we wrap up this deep dive. Whether you approach this text as a devout believer whose personal faith is being reaffirmed and challenged, or you are listening purely as a curious individual analyzing the architecture of ancient religious thought, the psychological and philosophical weight of this material is undeniable. The idea of a divine being who pursues humanity with such a relentless, costly, dangerous love fundamentally challenges how we view our own worth and how we treat the people around us.
It forces every reader to ask what it means to truly yield control of their inner lives, and what it practically means to love our enemies in a world that profits heavily from our division and outrage.
It absolutely does. And I want to leave you with one final lingering thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. We started this whole conversation by talking about the text's opening striking image. God is a father, sitting on the edge of the bed, singing a lullaby to his children to give them rest. Think about the specific era we live in right now. We live in an age entirely defined by chronic exhaustion. We have an epidemic of insomnia. We're trapped in this endless grinding hustle to manufacture our own identity, to secure our own status, to build our own little kingdom so we feel safe. What if our modern inability to simply rest, our constant anxiety, our doom scrolling, our burnout is not just a symptom of bad time management? What if it is actually a symptom of a deep, unrecognized spiritual homesickness? What if the profound peace we are so desperately trying to medicate our way into, or manifest our way into is simply a matter of stopping our frantic striving long enough to hear a lullaby that has been playing since the very foundation of the world? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope it sparked a new perspective, a new question, or maybe just a moment of peace. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and above all, keep learning.